Hi, I'm Spencer Krause. I've been building robots for over 20 years. In that time, I've seen a lot of interesting things, and I've heard a lot of interesting stories. Collaborative with Spencer Krause is a place where my peers and I can relax, have a drink, and talk about some of the crazier things we've seen at work and some of the experiences we've had that have gotten us to where we are today. Subscribe today to join the collaboration. Welcome to the Collaborative Podcast. I'm your host, Spencer Krause. Our guest today is Eryn Correa. Eryn is the founder and managing partner of Correa Legal, which is a boutique law firm here in Pittsburgh that helps startups, mainly tech startups, let's be honest. And Eryn, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on, buddy. It's been coming a long time. We've been talking about this. I'm sorry I couldn't get you on sooner, and I'm glad you could make it.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here too.
Awesome. So aside from being like an awesome lawyer, which I know you are.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's always good to have client recommendations.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I finally got that testimonial over to you too. Not to make this seem biased. But
I appreciate that. I know it's going to go up on the website soon.
Awesome. I'm just glad you received it.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess your backstory for people listening is like you started out, you were at, I believe, Canal Gates, and then you were in-house counsel for Alcarnic's board of directors, I want to say?
Alcoa.
Alcoa's board of directors, sorry.
Yeah, Alcoa after the split, so very specific Pittsburgh knowledge, but yes, Alcoa.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then was it like right after that you just decided to go off on your own?
No, so yes, I started right out of law school with Canal Gates. Worked in both their Pittsburgh and the Dubai offices.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so I did a bit of international work. I did domestic work. I did litigation. I did international disputes, commercial, not just commercial work, but corporate work too, before going in-house with Alcoa. And then at a certain point decided I didn't want to be a lawyer at all and walked out of the Alcoa offices and interviewed to be a barista at a local coffee shop, which I did from 2019 through 2020, which was an interesting time to work in food service.
Oh, that is an interesting time to work in food. I'm guessing you quit in 2020 for obvious reasons.
Well, I quit in 2020 because by that point I reconnected with somebody I went to law school with who decided he wanted to start a law firm, but he was unsure how to help startup clients. I had a bit of a corporate background from working with Alcoa and their corporate secretary's office and understanding securities work, understanding how boards work. And so he decided, okay, he had started an office or a law firm before. I knew how to do the corporate work. He had a client that needed help and decided that that we should join forces in order to help that client. And I kept thinking,
must have been a big client if it could start a whole law firm.
It was enough to float us.
Nice.
I mean, it was definitely enough to float us with a lot of help from a lot of people supporting us otherwise. Yeah. And I kept thinking like, I'll do this for now, thinking I might find something better to do or I'd find a different job. And as I went along, decided, actually, I like this better than anything else I did.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So how long have you been at it for? Like when was that? Oh, it's 2020.
August 2020. So 4.5 years.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah.
Congrats on not going out of business.
I know. Knock on wood.
We can't afford wood in this office. These are plastic.
Crap. The whole business can go up in flames now.
Yeah. But no, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. As somebody that went on to business on their own way before I should have, I respect that a lot. And it's a story as old as time, but a goodie and a good beginning.
Oh yeah, I love it. So yeah, I broke away from that firm in December of 2021. So I've been a solo practitioner since 2022, and I love it. I love being able to work with the people I want to work with, help the population I want to work with, and do it in a way that it centers the relationship. Like I love being a part of what people are building, and to me, that's the most fun part of what I do. Yeah,
no, grateful to have you available as a lawyer right now. Like it's been awesome.
Yeah, no, you're great to work with. It's fun. I really appreciate our working relationship.
Yeah, me too.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's not kiss each other's butts too much.
Well, we'll see what we can do. We still have another hour or so.
Fair enough.
Turn into
Look
a
my wrist.
It's a freckle past the hair.
So you talk about living in Dubai. What was that like, and when did you do that?
So I lived in Dubai from October 2014 through December 2015, and had been brought on very specifically for a small international arbitration or an international dispute. And so it was a Libyan oil company that was suing a Dubai oil company. And I traveled a lot in the Middle East before I moved to Dubai, but there was a difference between being a tourist and moving my entire career to a completely different country. And at that point, I'd only practiced law for 9 months before I moved.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I moved not knowing anybody and not really thinking that I needed to know anybody. I thought it was like study abroad. Like I pick up and make all these friends so easily. And I did become friends with the people in my office because they were great, and also the people I saw every day. But it was, I mean, Dubai is its own animal. I mean, it is glitzy and glamorous and skyscrapers everywhere and so hot that you can't even function. And an experience overall I'm really grateful for because it taught me to be a better lawyer because I had to switch everything that I knew about being an attorney when I got there, to learn a new legal system, to learn a new way of operating. I look back on it as a really positive and formative experience, but it was very challenging to move to.
That almost sounds like mind-bending to have to learn a whole new legal system,
It,
Can't
yes.
even imagine.
It was, I mean, I'm glad I did it when I was younger because I look at it and go, what was I thinking? I just like, oh, of course I can figure this out. I can figure all of this out. Like, I'll find an apartment. I'll make friends. It'll be great. Like, the truth is like for a good 4 months, I was pretty lonely and trying to figure things out. And
was that your first move or like one of your first moves? Like, it seems like you've lived in a lot of places.
I mean, I've mostly lived in Pittsburgh. And so,
Really?
yeah, I've traveled a lot of places.
Okay. Because you seem really well traveled. And like, I mean, you talk about like, I think your dad lives in Hong Kong, if I'm not mistaken.
He does. Yeah. So that's the thing is I think I had a false sense of confidence because I travel all of the time. I've been to 40 countries throughout Europe, Middle East, and
40.
Yes. And Asia.
Wow. Okay. That's way more than me.
And it's something I loved. It's
I
something
like to
my
think I'm
family
well
loved.
traveled.
I mean, you probably are. How many countries do you keep? I don't think you should even need to keep a list.
I mean, maybe 16 to 20, like if I had to guess off the top of my head.
Yeah, which is still a significant proportion of the world. And so, yeah, I've always loved to travel and I've always loved to explore. And I think because I thought, oh, I'm so comfortable and I love doing this so much, it would be easy. But people who've lived abroad talk about this, like, this curve that you go through where you get there and everything's really exciting and new and it's glitzy. And then you hit this slump where you're like, I miss my toilet paper and it's really hard. There's like really specific creature comforts that you can't
get that on Amazon there.
It didn't exist at that point.
Oh, wow.
I mean, 10 years ago, right?
Yeah,
It didn't
fair
really
enough.
exist.
I would have just started grad school at that time.
Exactly. That's the thing. Like 10 years ago, Uber was sort of difficult to get, or like, Dubai has a very specific, it did before the pandemic, like very specific
Just
communications.
fly to Israel and grab some toilet paper and go
come back. Yeah. That would, yeah. But no, you can't go to Israel because I had a UAE residency visa and my passport, so it made it very hard to travel.
Not allowed in.
I was not allowed in. I didn't even try, actually. They're in
I
Iran.
assume they have toilet paper in Israel. Maybe I'm wrong. I've not been yet.
Yeah, I've
Sorry,
not been
Israelis.
I've not been yet either, though it's on my list.
Did you know that Collaborative with Spencer Krause now has a merch store? Please go to cwskmerch.com for the latest in CWSK styles. You can get a hoodie, like the one I'm wearing, t-shirts, hell, we even have whiskey glasses. Everything in the store has custom art that our team worked really, really hard on, so go ahead and show your support for them, me, and the rest of the CWSK team by going to cwskmerch.com today. Better yet, support yourself and use discount code PODCAST10, all one word, all uppercase, for 10% off your entire order. Thanks for your support and enjoy the rest of the show. Collaborative with Spencer Krause is sponsored by SKA Robotics. If you're in the market for elite field robotics expertise, please consider hiring SKA Robotics. They sponsor this podcast and solve some of the toughest engineering problems in the world. SKA Robotics can be found at skarobotics.com. What's your opinion of stealth startups?
What's stealth startups?
So a stealth startup is a company that starts up and decides they're not going to tell anyone what they're doing. So you've not encountered this in your practice being about startups?
No, I've not encountered any stealth. Like,
So
how
I've probably
how
worked
stealth
with
do
like
you
4
mean?
or 5 dozen startups now. It's a term that refers to a certain type of startup, and I've spoken with a few of them, and I'm not going to say what any of them are doing because they're stealth.
Yeah, you don't want to blow up their spot.
Well, and I do respect confidentiality a lot. However, I do think it's stupid to not tell anybody what you're doing. So, like, what'll happen is, I'll tell you my opinion. So,
Please.
You didn't want to hear it. It's going to happen anyway. So they will, they'll go into stealth, and they're going to try to figure everything out without telling anyone, and that's their moat, is like no one's going to know what we're doing. But the problem is sometimes they just have a bad idea and they don't socialize it. And they could have found out it was a bad idea if they just told a dozen people and they got the feedback early on and then pivoted to something more viable. But because they don't, it tends to be insular, it tends to be paranoid, it tends to be kind of not well, reviewed. And so you've got, maybe lessons that could have been learned had you talked to more people in terms of like product market fit and engineering, and probably other things as well.
I mean, based on what you've said, I tend to agree that, and I mean, this is how I run my business too, is like most ideas are better socialized or with a community or people who can help you. And a lot of the ways that I feel like even the people that I hire and train, I want to train them so that if they want to leave me, they can.
Sure.
Mostly because I want more lawyers to be able to do what I do and help more of the entrepreneurs like I do.
100%.
And so that there's more of an impact. But the flip side too is like it's so lonely building a business. Like I would want more advice, more voices in the room, more input, and then being able to sort through
I
that
feel like
input.
the engineering process is better that way too. So I mean, when you've got multiple engineers working together, you even with really good engineers, I mean, like they're better with another really good engineer to talk to.
Right.
Because you got blind spots. We all do, and so like, you're not gonna see those by yourself.
Of course, yeah.
And I mean, people think I'm pretty good at what I do.
Yeah.
Like I'm much better at it with a second person.
Yeah.
Like in the room.
Yeah.
And
I think everybody is. Yeah. And really, I'd just be very curious as to sort of what the motivation behind that is, because again, from a legal perspective, and that's the perspective I come at it from, if you're worried about IP protection, you can
get a patent.
Yeah, get a patent. Put things in place that sort of put
certain
walls
trade
around
secrets, like they could, maybe guard that stuff, but like
Yeah.
not the whole business's existence.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's like if people find out your premise, everything would want to do this.
Yeah.
Everyone would want to do it. So there's another one I worked with that was doing a thing. I won't say what thing because I respect you. I don't respect you, but I respect your privacy. And so basically, they were doing a thing, and they just had the most back-assward way of doing it. And there was another company I was talking to who was doing the same thing, and they were totally out in the open. They weren't stealth, and like their way made so much more sense. Like they were just leapfrogging the stealth company.
Yeah.
And I'm like, huh.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
one is clearly working better than the other.
Yeah, and I think that would probably be the case. I mean, I've worked with companies who people are starting things and they were under non-competes, and so they needed to be sort of under the radar until they were ready to have their non-compete expire or something like that. And that makes more sense to me. But again, I'm looking at it as from a legal perspective, less from a maybe even like an IP perspective. Like I'm looking at it more as a contractual perspective.
Yeah,
so.
well, the non-compete thing is interesting. I mean, a lot of people are terrified of those.
Yeah.
And whether or not that's founded, I'm not sure. I mean, what's your opinion on non-competes?
On non-competes?
Yeah, like historically and with the recent FTC rulings.
Yeah, I mean, again, as a startup lawyer, and again, a startup lawyer in a small community. So I work in Pittsburgh, I work in West Virginia, both of which are quite small startup communities and well intertwined. I tend to believe that a non-compete can quell innovation because, startups,
Sure.
even successful startups or non-successful startups, they don't have a necessarily significant shelf life, or they might not be around for a long time, but they might have a lot of talent. And if you stop all of that talent from being able to start new companies or work in other companies, I think it has a quelling effect on the entire ecosystem that I don't necessarily believe in.
Sure. And also, I mean, I think to your point, I agree with you. When somebody has trained their whole career to be an expert in X,
Right.
Like, do you really want to stop them from doing that thing that they're really good at? Like, I mean,
Right.
that's their gift to the world.
Right.
Like, why would you take that away from the world and from them?
Right. And then I can also see the flip side too, right? Because as a lawyer, we're look at that as well. But like the flip side being, okay, you've spent a lot of time and money training somebody in making them even more valuable as an expert in X. You don't necessarily want all of that time and training and expertise and hiring and everything that you put into it to go to a competing company.
Yeah, but I mean, I like non-solicits, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think that's kind of the middle ground is like, don't take my clients, don't take my customers.
Right. Yeah. And I tend to agree.
And don't take my talent. Like,
Right.
Don't take my talent, don't take my customers. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and I think I agree with that premise of it. With the FTC ban, I mean, it's been it's been up and down, right? So it was in place and then it was challenged, and I think it's no longer enforceable. And so it's
Wait, the ban is no longer enforceable?
The most recent thing that I read was that it was challenged in a federal court somewhere, and as a result is no longer necessarily enforceable.
The ban isn't.
The ban isn't. So the non-compete ban is no longer. No.
So the non-competes are enforceable.
So yeah, that's the way of saying non-competes are enforceable. Yeah,
that's interesting.
That's the better way to say that.
Is that like a statutory thing, or like how does that work exactly?
It started out as a statutory thing. The courts have now weighed in, and now we're waiting for more courts to weigh in on whether or not it can be enforceable. So it's still sort of up in the air, but it
probably depends on where you live to some extent, and then also like just luck of the draw.
So right now, because it was a federal court that weighed in, it's a federal allowance still. So we're back to sort of square one, which is that non-competes are enforceable,
which is where we were before any of that stuff happened.
Correct. And so now it's sort of waiting again to see if another higher court will weigh in on what that looks like. And I don't know. So it's still in flux.
Okay, so who knows is the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm against as well. I think they're illegal in California.
They are.
Yeah, and there's probably other states that also have them illegal.
Yeah, I mean, with most things startup, right? Like Silicon Valley tends to be a leader in it. And so when I see things like that come out of California and they're saying, no, we don't enforce non-competes because we do want a circulation of talent within these different fields, I tend to then see like, oh yeah, that makes good sense. As a lawyer for clients that want to put it in place, you try to split the difference, which is give you enough time to reap the value of what it is that you've invested in, or like you said, make it non-solicit so that people aren't stealing your clients or they're not stealing the other talent that's still working for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, for the most
these
part,
relationships are valuable. I've worked really hard to build them up. Like, please don't, go after those. But like if you want to, go out and hang your shingle, that's absolutely great.
Yeah. And because it's not just the relationships that are valuable. I mean, it's real money on the line, like to find talent and to train them and hire them. I mean, that takes ramp up time.
Work.
Yeah. Yeah, it takes a lot of work. Yeah. You know what that's like.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, I've put training into people that have left after 3 months where, and that's the time they're useless.
Right.
You're really working and just, it's all input.
Yeah.
And then they're just like, oh, yeah, I got an awesome job. And I'm like, yeah, because I trained you.
Yeah, because I trained you for the last 3 months. Great. Yeah. 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 So, I mean, they're there for a reason. But again, as a startup lawyer, I like to see a reasonable circulation of talent. And that's sort of the side I come down on.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a company in town that has a non-compete that I lost one engineer to a while ago because as you know, SK Robotics hires a decent amount of moonlighters. So
yeah.
Like normally it's fine. Like if you don't, screw up somebody's day job, you can get them for like 10 to 20 hours a week outside of that. And it's good business. Like they can make more money. They can pay off their house faster.
Yeah.
You can help a client that, is looking for like non-recurring help in that area, that doesn't necessarily justify a full-time hire. It's a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when you come up against a non-compete there, I've seen a few reactions in the people that subcontract, while they're working somewhere else. One is just not wanting to do it off of fear of jeopardizing that job, which is, what we talked about. Another one is, I don't care. Like,
yeah.
What are they going to do?
Yeah. And that's, I mean, I'll preface this because, again, I'm a lawyer. This is not legal advice. But usually the best thing to do is if you are up against a non-compete, just go back to your employer and say, hey, can you let me out of this? Rather than, again, I don't want to leave the risk that you are flagrantly violating your non-compete. So I'd rather you just get a written agreement to say, okay, we're not going to enforce this. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to advise people to do the wrong thing.
I mean, you can say what you want, but as a lawyer, I have to disclaim.
Yeah.
This is not legal advice. None of this is legal advice. Yeah,
but then they might say no.
And therein is the problem. There's the other side of the risk.
You have a decision to make.
Yep.
Like, do you really want to work for an asshole?
That's a decision we always have to make. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So what are some of the industries and like the things coming out that you're really excited? Like, who do you like working with the most? I know you said startups, but like, is there a particular niche or like, problem set that your clients are working on that gets you excited to be their lawyer?
Yeah. I mean, I do love working with people who are in engineering and robotics.
Oh,
yes. Not to completely pander. But partly because it's a lot of people looking at problems that I don't know about. And it's things that then I get to work with really smart people all day who are looking at really interesting problems, and I get to facilitate the way that they solve those problems. So that's fun for me.
Yeah.
And I work a lot with social entrepreneurs and people who are looking at their business.
So what is a social entrepreneur? I know you explained it to me at dinner, but for the listeners.
Yeah, so a social entrepreneur is somebody who's looking at their products and services and seeing how either using their products and services they can address a social or environmental issue, or the way that they're running their business is mindful of their social and environmental impact. So
like how they're affecting the community they're operating in effectively.
Correct. So the easiest way to think about it is, if you work with, and there are companies that I work with that are focused on food waste or recycling, right? So they're looking at how it is that they can develop a product that is aimed at eliminating food waste or at making recycling easier in the United States, for example. But I also think about companies like Patagonia, where Patagonia is not necessarily solving any particular social issue.
Corporation?
They're a benefit corporation, or they were before they had that interesting corporate reorganization.
Tell me more.
I don't know too much about it other than that I think the owner of Patagonia put a lot of the company's ownership into a nonprofit organization or a trust. There's something there that I haven't quite narrowed in on. But if you look at Patagonia, right, like they're not necessarily solving any of the world's problems with cargo shorts.
They're not?
It depends on who you ask. But the way that they're running their company, right, even the way that they've structured it, is considered socially mindful and mindful of their social and environmental impact. So working with companies that are using entrepreneurship to solve issues that they see in their community is really exciting to me because I think business can be such a good partner in solving the world's problems.
Sure. I completely agree.
Yeah. And so that to me is really fun. And so now.
That's really neat. I mean, to be able to apply, sorry. I didn't mean
no, I know. Being able to apply, what I like to do is take the legal knowledge. I say my law degree is sort of the hammer I have. And if I can use that to help people accomplish what they want to accomplish, so much the better. And right now I'm really excited about working with these companies in West Virginia because every single one of them is really focused on, okay, how is it that my company is going to solve an issue in my community, whether that's food access, whether that's college dropout rates, whether that's banking practices. Like they're really looking at things of, okay, how is it that I can use this in order to strengthen my community? And I think that's really cool.
That is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
How do you align that with like the classic business goal of profitability?
I know you said you didn't want a legal lecture. However, I'm prepared to give you one.
I'm listening.
So
I never said I didn't want a legal lecture.
Oh well, I don't want to bore all your listeners then with law.
Let's listen. Let's listen in, people. If you turn off now, I'll see it in the analytics.
Like, oh, she's about to talk about something boring. But it is really exciting because a lot of times companies that are run with that sort of being mindful of their social and environmental impact do financially better. One, because they have buy-in from their employees, they have buy-in from their community, and they're thinking about the long-term impact of their decision-making so that they can see things that are coming down the road and not necessarily be always putting out fires. And so an example I use, and I teach a law school class about this, so an example I use is about...
Where are you teaching law school?
At Pitt.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I'm still in talks with them to take my class to a full semester. So maybe somebody at Pitt will be listening to this and think that it's worthwhile to expand the curriculum.
Professor Eryn Correa.
Yeah. I'm trying to add it to my CV. But if you look at something like, to use a very specific example, like Boeing, if Boeing didn't have necessarily, it wasn't looking so much at the commercial pressure to get an airplane out the door that was competing with other things that was cheaper than everything else, that they're pushing all of their engineers and they're pushing all their employees in order to get the cheapest product that they could out into the market, maybe there would have been somebody who could say, wait a minute, there's this problem with it. Or we were listening to the people who said there's this problem with it, and they would have avoided some of the PR and other catastrophic events that happened.
Which ended up costing them more money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, makes sense.
Then if they had slowed down and been like, okay, who's our customer here? Who are our employees working on this here? How is it that we make this in a way that we're mindful of who it is that we're serving and who it is that's working on this, and understanding that, yeah, maybe it'll take 2 years longer than we thought it did, which might be a catastrophic amount of money, but is it as catastrophic as what has been happening? I don't know. And so those are the things that I'm curious about, is like, okay, over the long run, if you're thinking about the sustainability of your company, about how long you want it to last, are you looking at short-term profits and gains? Yes, to a certain extent, but can you look to the longer term and say, okay, if I do these things and I take care of my people and I take care of my community, will I also be able to sustain for longer and therefore make profit over a longer term?
So I'm understanding you have to balance those things, right? Like, I mean, the higher level goal of a benefit corporation is the benefit of the community.
Mm-hmm.
However, you need profitability in order to be able to stick around, in order to fight long enough to achieve that goal. So
Correct.
They're both important.
Correct. And I think that's why I like working with it, because that's an interesting problem for me to solve. I get very idealistic very quickly, and I'm like, everybody should run like this, because I think this is the way that business should be run, and that's the way that the world should work. But I also work with early stage companies, and I know the realities of being cash strapped and having just a certain amount of money to allocate to all of the things that you want to get done.
Patagonia is an interesting example of like a larger company that does that. What are some other examples of well-known companies that are benefit corporations or B Corps that are out there?
So Unilever.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Unilever is a benefit corporation. So underneath them, they have like Ben and Jerry's, for example, is also a benefit corporation. I'm trying to think of other ones.
Ben and Jerry's was a Unilever subsidiary.
I think fact check me on that, but I'm almost positive.
You're wrong. Carl, look it up.
Yeah. And so like Warby Parker, if they're still around, they were a benefit corporation. I think, who was it? The shoes. Who are the shoes that everybody likes? Allbirds?
Allbirds?
Yeah.
No, I'm not wearing them today. But
yeah.
I've got a bunch of pairs at home.
Yeah. See, they're super comfortable and you really love them. Or like, what was it? Tom's Shoes was an early benefit corporation.
I remember Tom's Shoes. I never had a pair, but I heard the hype.
Yeah. So it's these companies where you look at them and you're like, okay, I understand that they're doing good as well as making profit. And there's certainly a marketing aspect to it, but it also needs to be backed up in order for, I think, consumers to buy into that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, people can detect BS.
Yeah, I think they can. Yeah. So it's interesting to see more companies understand that not only is this a good way to connect with their consumers or connect with their employees, but they're seeing an impact on the bottom line. And if you want to take it even broader, and if we look at, for example, climate change as an issue, as an issue that's not just a political issue, but also is a financial issue. Yeah. Because
although we had a 70-degree today in November, we both agree that climate change is awesome sometimes.
I mean, I remember wearing a winter coat over my Halloween costume, and yesterday I was walking around in a t-shirt. So there's sometimes you're like, okay. But from like a business perspective, that's going to touch every single business, right? And so if you can now be looking at how it is that your business is not only going to deal with climate change and how it impacts you, but also try to prevent the impacts of that's a bottom line issue.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's the thing that I get very excited about. I think it's really interesting to see the idea that if we all look out for each other, we can actually make the world a better place, which is a very idealistic way of looking at business, but it's why I like it so much, is why it's so much fun for me.
I mean, the fact that you can do that and also use it to be more successful in business is also awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to me, that's a very elegant solution. I'm like, oh, if you do the right thing, everything works out well. Again, very idealistic.
I think where I see it in my business, and I mean, obviously, we're not a benefit corporation.
Yeah, and neither am I, to be fair.
Neither is Tension Dynamics or SKA. Yeah, neither of them are. In my businesses, what I've noticed is, you have an incentive, like, doing good aside, to not screw people over, because if you do that, I mean, especially in Pittsburgh, but I would say, like, at least nationally, I'm sure it's true internationally too. I mean, to some extent, and most different markets aren't talking to each other.
Yeah.
Reputation gets around. Like, I mean, you screw someone over in Pittsburgh and everybody knows about it by lunchtime.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. Like, I mean, I think, there's almost like a self-correcting thing going on there too. Mm-hmm. Although some businesses do seem to do pretty all right being egregious. Like, so I don't know if it's universal.
And that's always the pushback, right? Like, you look at a company like Apple and Steve Jobs and him being famously or notoriously erratic and difficult, bordering on abusive.
Toward
And
his
people,
employees, you said.
yeah, and you're looking like, well, that is a very successful company. How can you say that treating your employees well is the only way to do it? It's not. There's always going to be arguments on either side for how this works.
Yeah.
Just the solution I like is, like you said, if you treat people well, you have a reputation that allows you to continue to build on that. And I think the other thing for me is that feels good. It feels good to have to build good relationships and be able to enjoy success that way.
You want people to want to come to work, you know. I mean, you know, if you're talking about the employee-facing side of it, I mean, also like, you know, I mean, if we do a good job for our clients, you know, and you know, maximize their success, like, you know, that, and then we're successful, and they remember that, and they'll hire us again. You know? And I mean, I think every client we've ever had that hasn't gone out of business has hired us again. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And yes, you think about your clients specifically. I think about employees a lot of the time. We're like, we only have so much energy to give to anything.
Yeah.
And if you show up to work and you feel like you're appreciated, you feel like you have ownership, you feel like you have agency, you're going to give more of your energy towards the company that is treating you like that than the one that is berating you or abusing you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's definitely retention issues with, you know, toxic work cultures.
Right.
To use a buzzword.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, there's really two sides, right? Like, I mean, you know, you're relating internally and you're relating externally.
Correct. Yeah.
I guess you've got vendor relations too. I mean, that's maybe similar to the employee side a little bit, but
Yeah. And to me, that all comes down to
try not to be crappy to my vendors.
right. Or just try not to be crappy, full stop. Like, that to me comes down to mission and values, which I know can be, again, something that you can put up and just be like, oh, this is my marketing thing or this is my PR, whatever. But I think if you have those mission and values that you have at the core of what you're doing, it becomes easy because then you don't have to think about it. You're like, oh, I'm just not crappy to anybody. That's like an easy operating principle.
Universally uncrappy.
Universally uncrappy to people. Like,
Correa Legal, universally uncrappy.
See, I've been trying to come up with a tagline. Finally, ChatGPT did not come up with anything this good. Universally uncrappy. And it's got the alliteration to use.
Just trying to think if there's a way to add a third U, but it's not coming.
Yeah, the only thing I come up with is
universally and ultimately uncrappy.
Universally and ultimately
superfluous.
uncrappy.
Yeah.
To you. Yeah.
To you.
Yes,
So that's
to
the
you.
other you.
Yes.
Yeah.
We don't spell well, but we really committed to that alliteration.
No matter who you are. But that's the same word, but it's for yous.
You can't make me laugh. I'm just going to cough all over your microphone.
It's all right.
Thanks. But yeah, I think that's why I do what I do. I love watching people build this.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I don't know. I enjoy working with our enterprise clients quite a lot. I think people are people, right? Like,
yeah.
I think, you know, whether you work for like, you know, a Google or a Siemens or like latest startup, like, you know, you're still, I mean, there's jerks and decent human beings, I think, in every organization beyond 10 people.
Yeah, no question. Yeah, and I think that's the most fun part, at least for me, about running my own thing is like, I get to center the relationships with the people I want to have relationships with.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's great. Like, that to me is what makes it rewarding and fun.
Did you not get that when you were working for other people?
I mean, it's harder, right? Because then you have a boss and you have somebody that you answer to. And so there's somebody else that's in control of your time.
Yeah. And so they're delegating, you have to talk to these people, you've got to work on these projects. And you're like, but Steve's an asshole. Steve.
For example. Or you're like, oh, you know, I was thinking this the other day, like, you know, I sat down to do work and then my mom calls me. I'm like, well, okay, I'll talk to my mom because that's actually what I want to do. She was in Copenhagen. She was FaceTiming me.
Oh, that's cool.
She wanted to show me what she was doing. And I was like, I'm grateful that even though, yes, I was going to sit down and do this thing, I get 25 minutes to see what she's doing too and that's another part of like centering the relationships in the business.
How old were you the first time you went from one country to another country, if I can ask?
How old?
Yeah, I don't mean to, sorry to cut you off.
No, that's fine. How old was I? I was young.
I figured as much.
Yeah.
From the fact that your mom's Copenhagen, FaceTiming you,
I know.
and you've been to 40 countries.
Yeah. So my father worked for U.S. Steel for a time when I was growing up, and he took a position in northern Spain for like 2 years. And so we would go and visit him, and I think I was probably 8 or 7.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I have memories of that, very distinct. But the things that like you would remember as a kid, I kept a journal when I was there, and there's like things you would remember as a kid. So there's like popsicle sticks taped in there. There's like seashells or like leaves, things that a kid is looking at. Yeah.
I think I was like 22, like the first time I made it to Canada.
Yeah.
Which is barely another country.
But I think that's typical. Yeah. So like I said, my grandfather is from Ecuador and he traveled everywhere. And so my dad grew up traveling everywhere, and my mom's dad was in the military. And they were everywhere. And so the idea of leaving the country was sort of baked into the culture of my family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome though, because I mean, when you travel, like it makes you more, it gives you diverse ways of looking at things. And then, at least for me, I feel like I kind of went in on it, and I'm like, wait, no, it's not that diverse, because everyone's really the same everywhere. Mm-hmm. And so it's just, you get this kind of great feeling of unification almost. And like, that's why globalism is awesome.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm grateful because I grew up with the idea that the world was super accessible. And so that's what I think was what really came from it. Is I know that travel is quite a luxury.
A lot of people seem to fear it, though, or is it just like a prohibitive lack of resources? But
it's expensive. Yeah. I think it's really expensive, and it is scary. I mean, we were talking about, it's nerve-wracking to be in a country
where you don't speak the language.
You don't speak the language, and you're just like, all of a sudden, your feet are cut out from under you, and that is scary. But yeah, I was taught that I could go anywhere at any time. And so, if I have a friend who calls me up, she's like, I'm thinking about going to Vietnam in the spring. I'm like, well, I'll check my schedule. And I appreciate that mindset. Yeah. Let me see if I can do it. And check the resources, check everything else. But it's not something like, I'd never go. It's like, let me just see if I can make that work.
Yeah. I do really want to make it to Southeast Asia.
You should.
Yeah. I would like to.
Yeah.
Like I said, I kind of want to go for like a good long amount of time though, because you're like on a flight for like a good long amount, like 20 hours to get there, and
yeah. Usually I fly. So I would say
I guess I don't hate flying, but I don't want to be like in the air for like 50% of the trip. Like I don't want to go.
No, I don't blame you. Yeah. No, I don't know. Also, because it's 12-hour time difference, so you get there and you're just inside out, and it takes you a while to readjust to what the time zone is, so that you can actually enjoy what you're doing. But I've always flown to Chicago, and then
try to be strategic with sleeping or sleep depriving myself on planes.
Yeah,
in order to get around that. Or
you can just take that Singapore Airlines flight from New York to Singapore, where they give you like a whole cabin. It's like $25,000 in order to.
Are you serious?
Yes, I'm dead serious. But you can sleep the whole time.
You just get a room?
Yeah, you pretty much get like a room on the plane.
That's awesome. Eryn, thanks for coming on. Is there anything you want to plug before we end the episode?
Oh, I wish I had been prepared for that. No, there's nothing I want to plug, even though
Correa Legal?
Oh, yes. Should plug Correa Legal. Please look up my law firm. I'd love to help you if you're an early stage company.
How do we find you?
You can go to my website, which is Correa Legal, Correa legal.co. Somebody already has the CorreaLegal.com. We're going to come for him. Yeah, or you can, if you Google my name is spelled Eryn, and Correa. Usually you'll find me pretty easily in Pittsburgh.
Cool. And your name will be spelled on the episode cover.
Oh, perfect. Even better. Yeah, even better. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. This is great.
All right, thanks for coming on, Eryn.
Thanks, Spencer.
Thanks for joining us today. If you've made it this far, chances are you'll like other episodes too. Collaborative with Spencer Krause is available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, and Radio Public. Subscribe today to get notified when the latest episodes release and support the channel. Collaborative with Spencer Krause is sponsored by SKA Robotics. If you're in the market for elite field robotics expertise, please consider hiring SKA Robotics. They sponsor this podcast and solve some of the toughest engineering problems in the world. SKA Robotics can be found at skarobotics.com. Thanks again, and see you on the next one.